So I will show you guys this two different ways. The first way would be the simplest way that we talked about, right? Now when we're looking at our first two terms, when looking at our first two terms, again we want to go by this by looking at FOIL. So we can say, well, I know if I can factor this trinomial as a binomial, to multiply to give me 5d squared, my only options that I'm going to be working with for this trinomial is going to be 5d times d. Yes? Now 8 ends up happening again to be the same thing. 8 and 1 and 4 and 2. But now let's look at this. Look at my middle term. My middle term is what? Negative. So if I'm multiplying positive numbers, are they ever going to add to give me a negative number? No. So therefore my factors have to be negative. And they both have to be negative because when I multiply them, they have to give me a positive 8. Right? So, now what we need to do is just determine, all right, so what values can I multiply now to give me this? And you guys can just pick and choose, you know, -8, -1. Put them in there, see if they work. Let's actually do the 4 and the 2 first. What about if I did -4, -2? We know 5d times d is 5d squared. We know -4 times -2 is positive 8. But what we're going to be most concerned with is, does this times this plus this times this give me -22d? And does that work, the blues? No. No. 5d times -2 is -10d, and then -4 times d is -4d. -10d minus 4d is -14d, right? However, if I switch them around, then that works, right? 5d times -4 is -20d. -2 times d is -2d, so it'd be 22d, right? And obviously, ladies and gentlemen, you can see that 8 and 1 wouldn't work because 5 times 8 would be 40, which is way too high. And then 8 times 2 would give me, or actually 8 times d and 5 times 1 would be high enough. So just a little guess and check when you guys are doing that. However, I know some students still don't understand this method, or let's say you try to do it this method and you just can't get it figured out. So ladies and gentlemen, we can always go back to ax squared plus bx plus c. I know it's different variables, but it doesn't matter. If I want to use this method, I can use a times c over b. What two numbers multiply to give you ac? What two numbers add to give you b? So we look at our a. A in this case is 5. C in this case is 8. So 5 times 8 is 40. What two numbers multiply to give me 40, but then add to give me a -22? -20 and -2. So then, what I'm going to do is now I'm going to replace my equation with those terms. So what I do is I say 5d squared minus 20d minus 2d plus 8 equals 0. Are these two equations exactly the same? Are the same? They're the same? Does everybody believe me? Who doesn't? Somebody has to not believe me. No? Alright, let me show you just real quick before Ryan gets to the point. You guys understand that 5 equals 5, right? Would you also understand that 4 plus 1 equals 5? Yes? Yeah, it makes sense to you guys, right? All I did is instead of writing 5, I replaced 4 plus 1. Well, look over here. Instead of writing -22, I replaced that with -20, or instead of writing -22d, I replaced that with -20d minus 2d. Is -20d minus 2d the same thing as -22d? Yes, of course. But why is this so important? The reason why it's so important is because now I can apply grouping. And when grouping, I can factor out my GCF. So when I look at my GCF, Kevin, I factor out a 5d, and I'm left with a d minus 4. Here, I can factor out a -2, and I'm left with a d minus 4 equals 0. Now I factor out the d minus 4. D minus 4 times 5d minus 2 equals 0. Do you guys see how I got to exactly the same answer? This is longer, but it's like foolproof. Here, you're kind of just doing more guess and check, right? So now you can just solve it by setting them both equal to 0. So d minus 4 equals 0, and 5d minus 2 equals 0. Therefore, d equals 4, and here d equals 2/5. Okay?